Benvenuti a tutti, sono felice che queste giornate dell'immagine e la parola si aprano con le nostre masterclass. Da sempre l'immagine e la parola è stato un evento molto legato alla dimensione di riflessione sullo stato del cinema, sul futuro del cinema. E quindi non poteva essere che l'occasione più giusta in cui ospitare una delle lezioni di Kevin B. Lee. Siamo contentissimi di questa collaborazione che è nata con l'USI. Le lezioni di Kevin B. Lee sono all'USI e all'Accademia dell'Architettura di Mendrisio, e questa sala piena che ci riempie di gioia dopo tanto tempo in cui le sale sono sempre dovute essere piene a metà per ben altre ragioni, ci riempie di gioia perché mette insieme studenti, giovani professionisti che vengono dalla Svizzera e dall'Italia, dall'USI, dall'Accademia di Architettura di Mendrisio, dalle scuole civiche di Milano e dal CISA. E proprio con il CISA noi stiamo organizzando in questi giorni la Spring Academy, per cui qui insieme a noi ci sono 12 giovani filmmaker internazionali che gireranno nei prossimi giorni dei film sul territorio. Buona lezione, grazie.
So, I am Professor Kevin B. Lee, and I want to welcome you to this Masterclass, which is quite literally a class, as it is an official lecture for the course Cinema Futures, which I teach at the Università della Svizzera Italiana, and I'm happy to see many of my students here in the audience. And yes, and I will give this lecture first, and then we will engage in a discussion and interview with the filmmaker Gitanjali Rao, who you just saw, before we watch her film Bombay Rose. So it's my first semester teaching at USI, and we are just starting to develop the study program in the future of cinema with my postdoc assistant, Raphael Denbach, and many colleagues at USI. I find this situation quite refreshing because we do not have to depend on an established program or even established concepts of cinema for our research and teaching. We can start, in many ways, with an open field. And this image of a field is something that comes to my mind when I think about cinema in the age of Netflix. Actually, there are two fields that come to mind. One is a field where everything is the same and there's only one kind of crop being grown, and another which has a variety of crops. In agricultural terms, these two fields are called the monoculture and the polyculture. I am no expert in agriculture, but just from these two images, one can generalize the basic qualities of the two fields as follows. The monoculture is easier to manage and produce crops, especially at a large industrial scale, but it lacks diversity, it depletes the soil, and it produces a lower quality crop. The polyculture tries to mimic the diversity of natural ecosystems by planting multiple types of crops. It requires more work to manage, but the diversity of crops maintains a rich balance in the soil and yields healthier crops. Now, when I think about, since we're here in the context of Locarno Film Festival in Palacinema, I like to think of film festivals very much on the side of polyculture. Now, when I think of Netflix, I actually go a bit back and forth in thinking about which of these two examples best describes what Netflix is to today's cinema landscape. But I can provide another image to describe Netflix, which resembles more of a mountain range, a Swiss Alps, than a field. It's a chart illustrating Netflix's stock market value from its initial offering in 2002 to the present day. This coming May 23rd will be exactly 20 years from when Netflix became a publicly traded company. And if you had invested $10,000 in Netflix stock on May 23rd, 2002, after 10 years, you would have made 11 times your investment, about $110,000. At that time, 2012, Netflix was the most successful DVD rental company in the world, renting DVDs through its website and delivered via the postal mail. It was still developing its streaming service, and it had not yet produced any of its own movies or TV series. This company, which was already incredibly successful after its first 10 years, basically reinvented its business model to dominate a new field of streaming entertainment. And here we have the results. Again, if you had invested $10,000 in the first 10 years of Netflix, you would have made $110,000. But if you had invested $10,000 in 2012, today you would have $430,000. Its success can be attributed to its ability to see the potential of streaming for movies and TV series, but also to invest heavily in its own productions to maximize its profits and not lose money in licensing fees to other studios. These are just two of the factors that mark the first effect that I would say Netflix has had on cinema, which I would call streamatization. This simply means that online streaming has become a normalized, legitimized form of cinematic experience. But it wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, most people still watch movies in cinema, on cable television, DVD, Blu-ray. So how did we get to the point where cinema got streamatized? Here are 4 reasons I can think of. First, Netflix's success can be attributed to its ability to see the potential of the internet streaming for movies and TV series. Thanks to the development of the internet over the last 20 years, with increasingly higher internet speeds and better connections. Seeing this potential at an early stage, Netflix used the internet as a low-cost, ready-made infrastructure that could provide a cheaper subscription model than cable TV and more selections than cable or cinemas. And here I would like to offer an example just from my own teaching experience. When I ask students, where do you watch films? Most of them say Netflix, and I'll ask them why. And the first reason is that it's cheaper. It's simply cheaper than going to the cinemas or even paying for a cable TV subscription for their home. There's quite an irony to this in that a lot of internet services that Netflix uses for its infrastructure are services provided by cable TV companies, such as here in Switzerland we have Swisscom. It's ironic that these companies in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere in the world did not initially make use of their own internet services to offer their own TV content. In many cases, these companies were so attached to their business model of TV just on cable that they weren't sufficiently motivated to change and adapt to delivering their content on the internet. So Netflix was able to use the internet services of these cable television companies to outcompete the same companies for their television content. This use of the internet also gave them an additional advantage. Unlike cable television, Netflix could collect a much richer and deeper set of viewer data to understand what kinds of films and series worked well with its audiences. This data proved incredibly useful for the last part of Netflix's successful strategy, which is to invest heavily in its own productions to maximize its profits and not lose money in licensing fees to other studios. Because it had the data of what might appeal to viewers, it could focus on developing productions that appealed to its viewers' tastes. And I will get further into this later in the presentation. There is also a fourth factor that informs its most recent period of profitability, the COVID-19 pandemic, which kept the whole world inside for 2 years with practically no choice but to watch films and series via streaming. And here you see the effect that it had on Netflix's market value, which effectively doubled from 2020 to 2021. During COVID, it really felt like Netflix had achieved the state of cinematic monoculture. It simply was what most people were watching. And yet, if you look at its value in recent months, Netflix has plummeted to nearly where it was before the pandemic. In terms of its market value, it is as if the last 2 years had never happened. The trouble started in January when Netflix missed its target for subscriber growth for the fourth quarter of 2021 and estimated that its growth in the first quarter of this year would be down 30% from last year. What's the reason for this? Could it be that Netflix and streaming films and series have reached their cultural peak during the pandemic? And in the post-COVID world, we are ready to go back to cinemas and non-streaming entertainment. Some of us would really hope so. Or could it be that the market domination of Netflix is also being challenged and eroded by a new landscape of streaming companies who have started later than Netflix but are quickly catching up? Disney Plus, for example, launched only in 2019, has more than 130 million subscribers worldwide, which is a little more than half of what Netflix has, but it took Netflix 8 years to reach that number, and Disney Plus only 2. So even if streaming remains a dominant way for watching movies, even if we want to call streaming the monoculture of our time, the landscape has become more competitive than ever, and it becomes harder for any one company to dominate. But what does this new landscape of competitive streaming mean for cinema? How will it affect the kinds of movies we get to see and enjoy? And also, what does it mean for festivals? One thing I can observe is that streaming is no longer seen as a secondary market for new movies, especially during the last 2 years of COVID. Since the Academy Awards are coming soon, the Oscars, here, we see 5 of the 10 films nominated for this year's Academy Award for Best Picture. And these 5 are all available on streaming. They were all available on the same day or within the same month of their theatrical release. And just for comparison, here are the other 5 films nominated for Best Picture that premiered only in cinemas. And let's just take a moment to ask yourself, how many of these films have you seen? And where did you see them? Did it matter to you if a film was available on streaming or in a cinema? And did that affect your choice of whether to watch the film? I'd be curious to hear your experiences and your feedback later during the Q&A session, which again will come after my conversation with Gitanjali Rao. But think about this, just in case you can't see the names. Belfast, Drive My Car, Licorice Pizza, Nightmare Alley, West Side Story, only shown in cinemas, and some of them are still only showing in cinemas. And then King Richard, Dune, Coda, Power of the Dog, Don't Look Up. Okay, but one thing for certain is that streaming platforms like Netflix, Apple TV+, Disney+, Amazon Prime, and HBO Max are now major players in cinema production and distribution, including the types of films that compete for Oscars, the films that are associated with quality cinema, which, by extension, it creates an association with film festivals. And here we have a visual timeline of Netflix films that received nominations in the top categories of the Academy Awards. In 2019, the film Roma by Alfonso Cuarón made history as the first film distributed via streaming to be nominated for Best Picture and to win the Oscar for Best International Feature. And this year, we have 4 Netflix productions nominated in the major categories, such as Best Picture, Power of the Dog, Don't Look Up, and Best Actress, Lost Daughter, and Best International Feature, The Hand of God. These films are directed by major talents of auteur cinema, such as Alfonso Cuarón, Martin Scorsese, David Fincher, Jane Campion, and Paolo Sorrentino, all of whom have been on record for praising Netflix for giving them the resources and the creative agency to make the films in the ways that the more traditional studios and production support systems could not satisfy. I would argue that this has been a part of Netflix's effort to acquire what I would call cinematic legitimacy for its streaming services in two ways. First, by promoting the productions as a top destination for cinema talents to realize their projects, and then by normalizing the streaming platform as a destination for audiences to find quality cinema. One also sees the role of the festival in this building of cinematic legitimacy when you compare this chart of Netflix Oscar contenders with this chart that shows how many of these films made their premiere at the Venice Film Festival. So again, okay, it's a bit of an overlap. And I don't want to say too much about this because if I understand, later we will have with us Alberto Barbera, the director of the Venice Film Festival. And I think it would be much more interesting to hear his perspective on Netflix's presence at the Venice Film Festival and the roles and the relationship between festivals and Netflix. But I think it is enough to see here how Netflix has worked with Venice as a launching ground for many of its most prestigious productions in pursuit of end-of-year awards. It also creates a stark contrast with another top festival, Cannes, whose first and last presentations of Netflix productions happened 5 years ago. The presence of two Netflix films, Okja by Bong Joon-ho and Myriad Stories by Noah Baumbach, in the main competition was met with much criticism because they would be released online the same time as in the cinemas. And as a result, the festival implemented a rule that all films in competition must have a theatrical release in France before streaming online, or else they would not be allowed to screen at the Cannes Film Festival. This reaction revealed, I think, a remarkable contradiction about the Cannes Film Festival, that the world's most prestigious platform for global cinema was profoundly beholden to its local cinema industry in such a way that it could not tolerate the increasing dominance of a global streaming platform. On its own part, Netflix hasn't complied with these rules and therefore hasn't screened a film at Cannes since. And one wonders, does it really need to? As another case study, we can look to a market such as Singapore, where the Singapore International Film Festival readily screens Netflix productions and welcomes its presence. Here's the poster for the movie Shirkers by the Singaporean director Sandy Tan, which won a documentary award at Sundance Film Festival and then was distributed by Netflix and has enjoyed critical acclaim while being mostly screened on Netflix. While Netflix in France might be seen as a threat to a well-established and supported cinema industry, for less established or developed film markets, such as in parts of Asia or Africa or the Middle East or Latin America, Netflix offers an attractive proposition to expose its films to a global audience. And this is really a key to a second part of Netflix's rise to prominence, the way it has built up its brand as a truly global platform for cinema, using the internet to connect local film industries to a global audience like nothing that has come before it. At the same time, Netflix doesn't play by the same rules as local and state film industries and funding bodies, which are often characterized by extended timelines of project fundraising, review, and approval, where committees must reach a consensus to approve a production, often leading to safe and unexciting works at the expense of edgier, riskier projects. In contrast, Netflix is able to leverage its global network of productions to develop a wider range of stories that can tap into the distinct cultural qualities of its creators and their cultural backgrounds. This would be one of the strongest arguments to make on behalf of Netflix as a cinema polyculture, a global garden of rich and diverse offerings. And here we have last year's example of Squid Game, the South Korean series that became a phenomenal hit around the world. Though, I suppose one could argue that if the whole world is watching the same show, is this not also a kind of monoculture? But anyway, this emphasis on diversity is a quality that Netflix developed from its beginnings as a production studio by taking on the projects that the long-established TV networks rejected. One of the most notable examples is Orange is the New Black, a series featuring an all-women cast with diverse cultural and sexual orientations, the kind of project that would have been too risky for mainstream television, but ended up becoming Netflix's most watched original series over its first several years. And I would say that this kind of risk-taking was largely in the domain of film festivals for the past several decades. Festivals like Sundance, Cannes, Venice, Locarno, that really positioned themselves as the places of discovery for new and exciting cinema. So could it be that Netflix figured out a way to hack the existing infrastructure of film distribution, devising a magic formula that took, on the one hand, the bold programming approach of film festivals and applied it to a global digital distribution network to create a combination of festival, cinema, and television that somehow surpassed all three? Again, based on the numbers, it would seem that Netflix has created an advantage over traditional television broadcasters that seems insurmountable. On the other hand, we've seen the stock market value plummet just in the last few months, so we know that these numbers are not stable, and there is plenty of competition in the field, though they are mostly from other US-based companies like Amazon, Apple, and Disney. And for comparison, if you look at this chart, you see 5 of the largest private broadcasters in Europe: Sky, Vodafone, Orange, Deutsche Telekom, Canal+, and in Switzerland we have Swisscom. These companies don't have nearly as much market share as their American competitors. How could this change? I can think of 2 options. The first option would be to create a European equivalent of Netflix. As an example, we can look at the recent merger between Mubi, a global streaming platform for films with a more art house and less mainstream sensibility than Netflix or other major streaming platforms. I'm just curious, how many of you watch Mubi or have a Mubi account? Okay, quite a few. All right. And the Match Factory, Europe's largest production and sales company for art cinema. The resulting company is still only a fraction of the size of Netflix and other American streaming and production companies, but it is an indicator of what could be possible at a larger scale. Let's say if Sky, Vodafone, or Canal Plus were to merge with each other or other companies across Europe to approach the size of Netflix. But this merger in itself between Mubi and Match Factory is significant in how it shows the effect that Netflix is having on art and festival cinema. How Netflix's vertical integration system between production, distribution, is now being adopted even by non-mainstream alternatives. Will this mean that more and more festival films will premiere within days of screening at a festival, or even the same day as a festival? How will this change the role and the significance of festivals in connecting films to audiences? But there are some built-in limits to this possibility because the media industry in Europe is virtually designed to prevent its own version of Netflix from growing and rising to dominance due to a host of regulatory measures that are meant to ensure the polyculture of European film and media. It really is remarkable then that Netflix was able to become so dominant in the European market by not being a European-based company. It could somehow circumvent all these regulations that govern European media companies and offer a global supply of films to the European audiences. It seems a bit unfair, don't you think? So that leads to the second option for creating a more competitive landscape, which is to regulate Netflix and other American streaming services. And this is currently on the table in Switzerland with the so-called Lex Netflix. How many of you have heard of this Lex Netflix? okay? Not so many of you. Well, now you're about to. Yeah, right. It's funny, isn't it? Well, now you're gonna know. This is why I'm here. A measure that requires Netflix, Disney Plus, and other streaming services to give 4% of their gross revenues in Switzerland to finance Swiss productions. And they will also be required to make European productions into 30% of their total offerings, at least 30%. The supporters of this bill say Netflix and other providers earn a lot of money in Switzerland, which has a lot of purchasing power. But today, all of this money flows abroad, especially to the United States. So we want a proportion. The Swiss film industry wants a proportion. And at 4%, we are talking about a pretty small proportion of this revenue to stay in Switzerland and be invested in Swiss productions. In this way, it can help Swiss films to succeed in the global market. So who knows, maybe someday we'll have a Swiss Squid Game. However, the opponents of the regulation say that it is an unfair punishment to businesses whose only crime is that they have created a successful product, and that the tax will just give money back to state institutions, which they argue are just simply not as good as creating good films and TV series. And they also argue that it will force Netflix to raise its prices, effectively passing the Lex Netflix tax onto the consumer. So the opponents of the regulation have made this argument, and they have generated enough support to put it to a public vote. And that's where you come in. Unfortunately, this is as much time as I can spend on this item today, because there's many things to talk about. So I would just say that those of you who are Swiss citizens should inform yourselves by searching online for multiple sources of information, educate yourself as best as you can, and on May 15th, you can cast your vote. It is your chance to shape the direction of streaming entertainment and even, perhaps, the future of Swiss cinema. Do it. So I've talked about streamatization and globalization as two of the major effects that Netflix has had on cinema. The last Netflix effect that I want to propose is the datification of cinema. What do I mean by the datification? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Netflix really led the way in collecting user data over internet and using that data to create a more engaging viewer experience. Now, I don't know how many of you, when you watch Netflix or other streaming services, are thinking that when you are watching Netflix, Netflix is also watching you. But that's what it's doing. And it's constantly applying that data set to different modes of evaluation. As you see from this picture, this screenshot, Netflix doesn't follow the classic modes of movie or TV genre, okay? And normally you would say, do you want to watch a comedy? Do you want to watch a thriller? Do you want to watch a romance? But they keep coming up with new keywords and categories to characterize their content. Do you want to watch moral ambiguity? Do you want to watch strong female leads or dangerous worlds? And they do this as a way to detect new patterns and behaviors in their viewers to respond to. These keywords, which I would call micro-genres, are ways of seeing what exactly is on the audience's mind that they would respond to if given a chance, so that the platform is as in sync with the viewer's desires as possible. And it has even formulated genres for describing how you watch content. Do you want to continue watching something that you haven't finished? Or do you want to start something that's on your watch list? Do you want to rewatch something that you enjoyed in the past or discover something completely new? In the past, media companies would organize viewers by their age, by their gender, by their income level, but this kind of algorithmic research wants to go far deeper into your psychology. The algorithm also knows that your behaviors are connected to time and space, so it notes down not just what you want to watch, but what time of day you watch and on what device, to see if there are additional patterns that reveal, for example, what you might be in the mood to watch as you're eating breakfast, or right before you go to bed, or on the train to work or to school, on your phone. It will even customize what kinds of images to show you based on your viewing profile. So here, on the right side of the screen, we have two images of the same movie, Good Will Hunting, a romantic drama starring a young Matt Damon that also stars the comedian Robin Williams. Now, if you've been watching romantic comedies, like the three examples at the top of the screen, the algorithm will recommend you Good Will Hunting with the romantic image of the film. But if you've been watching comedies, like the three films on the bottom, it will show you an image of Robin Williams. Netflix takes tremendous pride in the effectiveness of its algorithms, reporting that over 80% of what its members watch come from its recommendations. So it would seem that this system is working quite well. An intelligent, data-rich, fully responsive, interactive system to produce maximum satisfaction and engagement for its viewer. But there are critics who say that the algorithm actually works in a way that limits the overall viewing experience of the viewer, because it generally offers content that is closely associated with what the viewer has already watched before. So we could call this a kind of monocultural state of viewing brought about by the algorithm. This is rather ironic, given that Netflix has done such an immense, phenomenal job of creating a polyculture of diverse content from all over the world. But if someone is just watching films or series that all have the same storylines, the same character types, the same ideologies, or even the same emotions, does it matter if they all come from India or Argentina or Switzerland? And there's another dark side to a media business model tied to maximum viewer engagement, which is in how that engagement is measured in the time spent on the platform. This measurement is called view hours, the number of hours spent watching content. The more hours spent watching, the more valuable the service can say it is. As logical as this may seem, what it has led to is a trend of maximizing the length of the content to generate maximum view hours. Something that used to be a movie now gets made as a series. If view hours and datafied viewing favors length, then this could actually lead to the production of fewer films and more series. And this issue of overproduction will only get compounded as more streaming platforms enter the field. As we have Disney, Amazon, Apple, HBO Plus, and even further, all creating content and all trying to create more and longer content as a way to capture your attention. You see here the quote, "The sheer amount of content thrown at our screens is part of a streaming arms race as each service tries to cement itself in your life." Does this mean that what could be a polyculture of many streaming platforms actually is a monoculture of excessive, overlong, mediocre content? But what's more disturbing than the effect this will have on movie productions is the effect that it will have on us as viewers. And this negative effect, I think, is actually perfectly captured in this famous quote by Netflix CEO Reed Hastings, when he was actually celebrating the addictive, must-see qualities of Netflix content. Okay? You get a show or a movie that you're really dying to watch, and you end up staying up late at night. So Netflix's competition isn't HBO or Amazon or Apple, it's sleep. And Netflix is winning. So thinking about the implications of this quote in terms of how Netflix has disrupted not what we watch, but how we spend our waking hours. It's interesting because some of my students tell me that they actually like to watch Netflix to help them to fall asleep. And I've had students tell me that they will put Netflix on not necessarily to watch Netflix, but just to have something in the background the way that my generation would have music in the background when we're doing something else. So it really tells you something about how Netflix has created a presence of familiarity in people's lives, especially younger people. That media provides a familiar presence to help them as they do their chores, do their homework, have their meals, or try to fall asleep. So it's as if Netflix has taken on the role of a personal assistant or a companion, helping them wake up, helping them on the way to work, keeping them company during meals. One has to wonder if this is really watching content or spending time with content. As if Netflix was another person in your room. And as far as the Netflix metrics are involved, as far as what determines what is successful and what is worth investing in, it really doesn't matter. For them, spending time is actually more important than watching. So could this actually be a new definition and role for cinema, media that you don't necessarily watch, but that coexists with you? If these are the new behaviors and habits and relationships that have been created by the datified, streamatized cinema of Netflix, it may take some time to assess the full effects of this change on society and culture. And what exactly does this mean for moving images as an art form? If we want to hold on to traditional standards for the cinematic experience, it actually feels a bit grim. I don't think that traditional cinema is about binge watching and compulsive viewing, where you have a film or a series playing in the background while you're doing other things. It really is more like things that you would do on your phone, scrolling Instagram, checking your Twitter feed, multitasking, constantly seeking new content or stimulations to consume, getting that dopamine hit, a kind of cinematic doom scrolling. I'd like to think that there is a kind of cinema that can stand as an alternative to these modes of behavior. And so when I ask myself, in this age of overabundant, ubiquitous media content, what in the end really is good cinema? And I find that the answer is really quite simple. Good cinema is something that you remember. A moment, an experience that stands out in the flat landscape of constantly streaming content. When I talk to my students, it turns out that they have a similar view. In an earlier class, if you remember our last class, we asked ourselves to share our most memorable movie experience. And if I'm not mistaken, not a single student mentioned watching Netflix on their screen as their most memorable movie experience. Nearly all of them had to do with watching a film in a cinema, being in an audience, feeling a certain mood, and hearing the reactions of others in a shared space. This was an environment of heightened attention and of communal belonging. So it's clear that the experience of cinema is really something special. and something that movie theaters and film festivals have a role in reasserting in our lives. It's ironic and rather tragic that this experience of cinema that my own students have described as the most memorable experience of images in their lives is in the process of withdrawing from everyday life and cultural memory, especially due to its absence in the last 2 years of COVID. Streamization, datification, and this new globalization of cinema, they are not going away anytime soon. And they may very well be the dominant mode of cinema in the years to come. But perhaps in time, enough of us will see that it's not all there is to cinema, much less what is really memorable. So I'll leave you at that. And now I think we will transition. So the reason why we selected this film, Bombay Rose, and we invited Gitanjali Rao to speak with us today is Gitanjali's film offers a quite interesting example of a film that was very much made to be distributed within the festival circuit, but eventually made its way onto Netflix. It has the distinction of being the first animated feature film from India to be distributed on Netflix. So it's a very specific, very unique form of cinema that has found most of its audience in Netflix as opposed to film festivals. But that's also partly because of the circumstances of COVID-19, which affected the distribution of the film. So there's many things to talk about with this film as an example of some of the things that were covered in this talk. So I guess with that, I would like to welcome Gitanjali Rao back. Hello.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi. So, Gitanjali, welcome. And I don't know how much of the presentation you were following or how much of it might be relevant to things on your mind or your own experience distributing your feature film with the help of Netflix. But before we get into those things, maybe we'd like to give you the chance to introduce the film in your own words, to prepare our audience who has not seen it yet, to give them an idea of what to expect. So, thank you, Gitanjali.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you. It's a great pleasure to see so many people collected in a place and watching a film. As I was telling Elena, this is the first real screening of Bombay Rose since it released on Netflix on the 8th of March, exactly a year back. So it's a delight to see that things are getting back to normal. And Bombay Rose is, it's also very special because the world premiere of Bombay Rose happened in Venice in 2019. And as Kevin said, we had a short festival round of about 5 months before the pandemic began. And we went straight on to Netflix. Before we start talking about the film, since you haven't seen the film, but you are eventually going to watch the film, I thought it would be nice to let you have a feel of the kind of work that I do. This is animation, this is painting frame by frame, this is drawn and painted very laboriously over years, and a work of art which moves. So I thought it would be nice before we start our conversation to let you have a glimpse of the film, a short 6-minute piece that I have put together, which is very special because it is a song picturization which runs through the film, and it's a montage of images of the film. Maybe we can just watch the film, and then it would be easier for me to talk about the film, the style, the uniqueness, and how festivals, OTT, and various things influence the watching of the film. So if you would let me, we can start with this clip and then continue the conversation.
Excellent. That was really extraordinary, gorgeous segment of your film, and again, really a pleasure to see it on the big screen. I wish you were here to see it with us, at least in presence. I can also say that one thing that really struck me in the beginning scene of the film takes place in a cinema. So there's a bit of kind of strange feeling of watching it in a cinema, and you're watching an animated scene of a full movie house in Mumbai. So the film itself is about a rich it's like a rich collection of cultural experiences, of images. It's like an archive or an encyclopedia of audiovisual, and it has this kind of aching quality of memory. There's a strong feeling of a longing or a nostalgia for so many images that we have. At the same time, your film deals with quite serious themes of prostitution and sex trafficking that I even wondered would be possible to depict in a live action feature film. So that also intrigues me in terms of how you use animation to tell a story that on the one hand is so beautiful and fantastical, but on the other hand is dealing with such serious topics. So how did you come up with the concept of the film, and then how did it eventually make its way to festivals and to Netflix?
The film, as you said, yes, it is basically my love letter to the city which I live in, and which inspires me to tell the stories that I do. And I tend to make it very realistically, although my medium is animation. My form is almost like a documentary, and I like to make animation which is not the formulaic kind of filmmaking which people expect from animation, especially in India, when it is understood to be for children and with superheroes. So it is, right from the beginning, it's a very different kind of film for animation. And being an artist, I've always enjoyed telling stories or telling things which matter to me using the form of paintings, of moving the paintings. So I feel certain very difficult topics like political topics or social topics, issues like prostitution or child labor or Hindu-Muslim tensions within the love story. These are very prevalent in our society, and I find animation a very beautiful medium to tell these stories, because somewhere I can be very poetic, I can be aesthetic, I can leave certain things untold, I can leave certain questions unanswered and let the audience deal with them through the medium of animation much more easily than live action. I feel there are certain things when you show them very realistically, they have a different impact on the audience. But when you tell them through a painting, when you tell them through a poetry, it has a different take. And my films are actually very poetic, very like paintings which move. And as you watch it, these issues or these problems come alive through the characters. So all my films that I have made, and of course Bombay Rose took a very, very long time to find finance and for me to be able to make the film. So I was working on the script, on the pre-production, which is the animatics of the film, for about 4 years before I started the production of the film. So that gave me a lot of time to absorb stories about people and characters that live around me and to convert them into the story that I was saying. And it was also a very lonely process because I was doing this completely by myself. I didn't have the finance to hire people. And I had made short films completely by myself before this. So I had the confidence of being able to do all the stages of filmmaking by myself. And if I find the finance, then it could extend to having a studio which would come in to do the production of the film. So in that sense, a single vision that I had of the film when I wrote the film and when I envisioned the film remained intact till the point that I got the finance until I was able to make the film.
So it wasn't made with Netflix in mind. I guess maybe you had the original idea that it would be distributed first in film festivals and then be picked up by a distributor, whether domestically in India or internationally. So then how did that play out in terms of from the point that you finished the film to it reaching Netflix, and how did Netflix, how did the partnership with Netflix evolve?
When I started, when the seed idea of the film happened, Netflix did exist. This was back in 2012. So yes, absolutely. For me, with Bombay Rose, it was never made with an intention to have it on Netflix. Back in 2012, when I first had the idea of the film and I started writing, I found it difficult to find the finance within India, and I started looking at co-production markets. And I realized that was also a very long process. So I started making a part of the film as a short film. I decided that for me to make a pitch for somebody to put their finance into a film, because my style is very unusual, because I do not have star voices, I do not have anything really conventional in animation going for the story, I decided to make a short film which was called True Love Story, which was just the gist of the love story told in 19 minutes, 19, as a short film. And I made that all by myself, sitting at home along with other work. It took me 2 years to make that film. And luckily that film was selected in Cannes Critics Week in 2014. So that's where the short film premiered. And because of that, I found my French co-producers who were interested in my work, and they were ready to support me to see that it becomes a feature film. And I started writing the script for the feature. I was attending a lot of script labs, international script labs. The script was getting selected in Cinémas du Monde, in Cannes, in Film Bazaar in India. So over about 3 years, I was writing the film, I was meeting people, I was showing this 19-minute short film that I had done, and that built a very credible docket of the film, which then finally I found Indian co-producers, Swisscom International Limited, who came in as the Indian partners to make the film. This was in 2017. It took about 1 year to draft the co-production deal between France, UK, United Kingdom, and India. And during that time, when the co-production deal was being signed, I started doing the back work of making the animatics of the entire film. Animatics is like, in animation, it is the first stage where you make still drawings of the entire film and put it on your timeline of about 90 minutes with dummy sound and music. So it gives you a blueprint of what the film is going to look like. In animation, this is more important than a script. So I finished that, and at that point, the finance all came together. And the moment we got the finance, it took about 21 months to finish the film. Now, 21 months is a very, very short time. But given the fact that I had spent 4 years to raise the finance of the film, I could manage only 2 years to produce the film. But we managed to finish the film in 2 years. And as we finished the film, we started applying to the festivals, and Venice selected the film. And our idea was to, of course, see how the film is received in Venice, see how the film progresses in festivals, and then find a suitable date to release the film. And of course, my producers were also very ambitious, and they wanted to send it for the Academy Awards. And that is a time when the dialogue between Netflix and my producers, Swisscom, started just before we screened the film in Venice. This was 2019, August, much before the pandemic started. However, given the kind of film that I had made and the fact that in India, releasing a film like this is extremely difficult because we are competing with extremely big star-driven Bollywood movies, which are running for weeks and weeks together, and to find a space for a very small independent film, artistic, unlike the rest of the world, in India, we have to compete with them. We don't get any kind of government support. So back then, also my producers realized that maybe if we do not have the kind of finance to do the publicity to release the film in theaters, we shall also look for an option on OTT. And of course, Netflix and Amazon were the first people. So my producers, by the time I finished making the film, were very definite that we will pursue OTT as much as we will pursue theatrical release. And by that time, having your film on Netflix or Amazon would still qualify you for the Academy Awards, because over the years we saw there was a time when Cannes would not select films which were made for Netflix, and within 3 years the rules changed and festivals were taking films in from OTT. So it was a period of a lot of change of decisions. So although the film was never made for OTT, by the time we finished making the film, it became a very lucrative option.
And can you say a bit about, it was interesting just now that you said that a film like yours really has a difficult chance being shown theatrically in India because of this blockbuster Bollywood culture, which I guess is synonymous with blockbuster culture in the United States and also Europe, I would say. So does that mean that Netflix actually offers a special and valuable place for works such as yours to be seen in India? And could you talk a bit about Netflix and streaming culture in India? How is it perceived? How valuable is it? How do filmmakers regard Netflix as a place for showing their work?
So a lot has changed in the last 2 years of the pandemic as before the pandemic. So back then, yes, Netflix, Amazon were picking up a lot in India. I think we're one of the, apart from China, we are one of the biggest subscriptions for OTT channels, especially Netflix and Amazon. But in the last 3 years, also a lot of regional channels have started in India. And one has to understand that Bollywood is only one language film that works in the for the Indian audience. We have about 35 languages in the various states of India, and they all have their own regional language cinema. Extremely evolved, some of them are, and they are also they are made and consumed by the various states which speak that language, but now they're also coming out of those states, and especially with, say, a Netflix. So how Netflix began, say, about 4 or 5 years in India, 4 or 5 years back in India, it was dominated by the Bollywood and the Hindi language cinema, of which Bombay Rose is also a part. It is essentially a Hindi film. But it was not really taking in a lot of regional cinema. However, after the pandemic, because the demand for regional cinema also grew, what Netflix has done is also taken films from a lot of other languages in India, translate them or dub them into the languages which are used. So what has happened is definitely, instead of people in Mumbai watching only Hindi cinema, people in Mumbai, which are the cities especially, are the biggest consumers of Netflix and Amazon. The smaller cities, the smaller states are bigger consumers of their own regional language OTT platforms. But the big cities, the metropolitan cities, where most of the money for the subscription comes from, and it is a richer place, were limited to watching the cinema of their language when it came to the theaters. Because in theaters, you don't have in Bombay theaters, you don't really have films from other languages, even European languages. It's either American or Hindi. But with the OTT, sitting in Bombay, you could see films coming from various different regions. And if you choose to watch them, you could. So there is a democracy which happened. There is a lot of secularization of cinema which happened with the OTT coming in. And also the multiplex culture, which happened in the last 10 years, has made cinema going very, very expensive. These multiplexes are located in malls. You have to park a car, you have to do some shopping, you have to buy food from the theater, which is extremely expensive. So the expense of a family of 4 or 5 people going out and watching a film in the theater was consistently rising. and it was very profitable to the malls, to the shopping malls and the multiplexes. But it was not the greatest thing for filmmakers and for distributors, because you lose a certain amount of audience who cannot afford to watch this film. And most of Indian films are made for the middle class, the masses, the people who work in factories and they want a break and they don't want to see reality, they want to see fantasy, and that is what Bollywood's films are, song and dance and happiness and things like that. So somewhere there was already a problem in terms of the finance of filmmaking was now going more into shopping malls, parking places, food, popcorn and Pepsi and things like that, rather than actually to the films. And therefore it became more and more difficult for people like us, like for a Bombay Rose, if it had to be in a multiplex, in a mall, the kind of publicity money that we would have needed would have been huge, because you have to publicize in all these malls, you have to go and make presences, you need a star and all those things. So it's only some films which can afford to do that. Most of the other films are satisfied with festivals, and then that's it. Nothing happens to it. So with the OTT, it opened up a venue for films which are not blockbuster films, which can be independent films, films which are a smaller budget, films which belong to another language. So that has been a big difference. Of course, with the pandemic, it just sealed the entire, should I go to the theatre and watch a film or should I stay at home? That decision was also taken away from the audience. So it went completely into OTT. And we are a huge consumer of entertainment. So the OTT platforms have done very, very well in India through the pandemic. Not just Netflix and Amazon. There is a lot of work happening in a lot of other channels also. People have been busy doing shoots between lockdown periods and managing to make content. A lot of content has found space.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I want to ask you, was just the effect of COVID on Indian cinema industry and culture, because as you said, like film culture in India is one of the richest film cultures in the world. And so what does it mean for a nation of 1.5 billion people to not be able to go to the cinema? But first, a question I had, well, just, you made a pretty vivid case for why audiences would benefit from watching your work on Netflix, but how was the relationship with you and Netflix? In my presentation, I talked a lot about how Netflix generated a ton of data as a way of studying and understanding audience behaviors, and I could imagine how your film could, generate interesting analysis of how does a film that looks on the one hand like a children's film, because we associate animation with children's entertainment, but the themes are very very mature and dealing with very serious issues. So in many ways your film really disrupts easy categorization. So I would imagine Netflix would find it a really fascinating case on their part. But how about for you? What did you take from the partnership with Netflix, and what was your experience working with them?
I really didn't. This was a buy-off of the film after it was completely made. So creatively, I had nothing. I worked at no creative level with Netflix. For me, the film was made, and it was for my producers to decide which is the best channel to give it a space. And for them, it was, I think, more monetary and in terms of the pros and cons of the contract, which made us go for between Netflix and Amazon. And if it was not Netflix, then we would have gone to the smaller OTT platforms. So I really never dealt with Netflix in terms of the content of my film. And I believe later on I found out it was a difficult film for Netflix to accept, but it took a lot of convincing, and it took a lot of negotiations, after which they were comfortable with the film. And also what happened was So the film was supposed to release in December, and December of 2020. And one thing that Netflix does, and which is not something which most filmmakers are happy about, neither was I, was the moment we signed the deal with Netflix, we stopped all festivals and all other screenings. So this, for me, would in a normal year have been tragic, but given the fact that it was a pandemic and the festivals were anyway getting cancelled, I did not feel I suffered from it too much because I had 5 months of festivals and then the pandemic started. But as a deal, it is not something very nice because it took 1 year for the negotiations from the contract being signed to the release of the film. And for that 1 year, the film could not go into any festivals. And that feels like something taken away from you as a filmmaker. In a pandemic year, it doesn't, but otherwise it would. And over and above that, at the time of its release, something very tricky happened that the political state in India started swooping down upon OTT platforms for showing content which was religiously sensitive. So now this Hindu-Muslim love became a very sensitive issue for other reasons in India in the month of December, which was the time my film was going to release. And in the trailer, we have this one scene in which the boy and the girl tell their names. And if you're an Indian, you would know exactly that the boy is Muslim and the girl is Hindu. And this is a love story between a Muslim boy and a Hindu girl in a small 1.5-minute trailer. But the audience, and especially the Indian people, kind of retorted to it with a very negative reaction. This is from the right-wing politics that exists in our country, and they were targeting OTT platforms. So Bombay Rose got targeted with Netflix, and it was a bad time. So they stalled the release of the film to March. The film had nothing to do with the problem that the people were having, but they had. It was the political situation. There was an arrest warrant against the main person in Amazon, the lady who heads Amazon. So it was getting really, really dangerous. And these factors can sometimes then affect your individual film, which might not be the case when you are releasing a film in theaters. You're ready to take that risk. But is an OTT platform for one single film ready to take a risk or not is going to be is going to decide the fate of your film. So although there are some very good things about being on OTT, one also has to realize that it works as a corporate office. You're not the only filmmaker, and they have a much, much bigger business to run. What they are looking at is content. How is that content going to be accepted by the audience? They're not looking at artistry and theater and cinema. They're actually looking at safe content. So that's one thing about an OTT platform, where the number of films, the number of people will then dictate what goes onto the platform or doesn't. An individual artist's voice can definitely be sidelined because you're not that important in the big sphere. This then gave me the feeling, because I worked with Netflix after Bombay Rose, that one has to, as Maqbal Baf said in his article, you're creating content, you're not creating cinema anymore. When it comes with a certain brief from OTT channel, no matter how much they say, no, we want original cinema, eventually it will always be tailor-made for their audience. They want tailor-made films for the Indian audience. Now, Bombay Rose, they told me, is not for the Indian audience, it's going to be an international release. For a director, that is difficult to understand because I made it for everybody. But the distributor is going to figure out that this content works better internationally than it does in the Indian context. So when the release eventually happened in March, it was really played down upon. They didn't want any controversies. And algorithmically, you had to really search the name of the film almost down to the last alphabet. So it's not my fault, it's not their fault, it's the situation around, it's the condition around that affects your film. So these are things one should always keep in mind when you're going to work with an OTT channel.
Well, you bring up this question of audience and how the audience reacts, and so maybe this is a good chance to actually engage the audience that's come to listen to us. We have quite a full house, and I invite our audience to ask any questions regarding the presentation or the conversation with Gitanjali. Okay, I'll ask another question about audience. And, oh, okay, sure. So we have a question. Yeah. Okay, and I think there will be, I'll translate if it's in Italian, Gitanjali.
Sì, allora parlerò italiano. Cioè, mi chiedo, dopo tutto quel che ho sentito, e mi chiedo, insomma, un cineasta penso che c'è una certa quantità di energie per poter fare un film. Dopo tutto quel che ho sentito, ma rimangono un pochino di energie per pensare al film?
Wow. Okay, so this is quite a question. I mean, having this is a question from a filmmaker that having listened to this presentation is just exhausting because you have to think about you have to think about all of these things that I presented about Netflix and streaming in just now, and do you even have any energy left to make a film? And Gitanjali, I wonder, having had the experience you'd had with Netflix, I mean, does it change your concept and your thinking about what types of work you want to make, knowing where it might end up and how to make it, how to make it work in this new streaming landscape?
The thinking and the working around making a film is huge, regardless of whether it is for an OTT or for just to make a film. I think about 80 to 90% of the work is just being able to find your finance, being negotiating, and a very small part of it is actually making the film, which is the most pleasurable part of it. But it's very, 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 very small. And I thought, as a filmmaker, as I make more and more films, I hope this part of making the film is going to be much more, and there's going to be less part of struggling to make the film or struggling to find the finance or see whether it can get released and things like that. But no, the rest of the work always is a lot, and you have, if you cannot keep your energy together while making the film, then it's then it's a defeat. What happens is, as you go along it, I feel it gives you more energy to put up a fight, to resist certain things, and to take them as challenges, and then put them creatively into your work. But yes, I agree. Now that we stand at a point where, if I went to a producer with my script or my idea, my producer is going to tell me, you know what, even if I finance this film and I make it, I am going to have to sell it on to an OTT platform. So let us together go to Netflix or Amazon or any of the OTT platforms before anything else. So I, in a way, I have to actually trespass other people and go straight to the platform. But that also means that the platform is going to dictate the kind of work they would like me to do, or the kind of work that they might accept if I do. It can be very, very limiting. To a lot of artists, it can be very, very limiting. But then what are your choices? Now, if you're in a country which supports artistic filmmaking and you do not have to go to your end buyer, that's brilliant. But if you are struggling, and if you're from a poor country or a country like mine, which is not poor, but in terms of cinema, but we have no funding which comes in for experimental or artistic cinema. So it's very poor in one sense. It's also very rich in another sense, that we make 900 films a year. So we make a lot of content, and you're competing with huge numbers. So in that scenario, what are your choices? And what is the best way you can have your idea? You can squeeze in your politics. You can cleverly do a few things. So it is, of course, it is exhausting. It's just that you don't give up and you try and make the film in the best way that you can. But I would say, yes, dealing with an OTT directly before I make a film can be very restricting to me as a person, because I come from a time where cinema means a lot to me. The take back of an audience in a festival, an intelligent audience, not a down mainstream audience, but an intelligent audience, a critiquing audience thinks of my film, even if the number is small. So if I am that kind of a person, I'm going to find it very difficult to make content for OTT.
Thank you. Yes, we have an intelligent audience with us here. And you're welcome to ask any other questions. Oh, there's a hand in the back.
Allora, ciao, grazie. Volevo chiedere in che ruolo si colloca lo spettatore nel cinema prodotto da Netflix, che targetizza e in qualche modo spersonalizza tanto l'audience, considerando anche le parole di Chitang Virao, che ha detto di aver fatto un film d'animazione anche per far partecipare lo spettatore attivamente nell'esperienza del suo cinema.
Okay, the question, as I understand it, is Gitanjali, how do you see as the role of the viewer for your film, especially in a context like Netflix? I guess I don't want to distort this question, but it does connect to a question I had for you. Yeah, like how, because it's very clear to me that you want to engage an audience, and so do you feel like you are engaging an audience? Are you getting feedback through the Netflix platform, or is it more about visibility? Because you said, yeah, okay, Netflix gives you a platform to show your film that the cinemas do not, but then do you feel like it has this effect of reaching an audience and connecting with an audience, and you get feedback through that channel, or is that only something that you can experience through festivals?
Absolutely none. And sometimes I feel so frustrated and depressed, even if my own friends have watched the film, and also because of the pandemic. I am never going to find out how they liked the film, what they thought of the film, how many people watched the film, nothing. And that's extremely unfair, but that is how it is. And I could find a number of people who have seen it over the last 1 year, but honestly, I know that number is going to be very small. So I really don't want to know. I totally miss the interaction of audience after having made the film. But I cannot cry about it. In a year of the pandemic, where worse things have happened, this is the least that can make me feel sad, and that is how I have learned to take it. Maybe 2 years down the line, one can have both. You still have the film going to festivals for about 1 year, and then you go on to OTT. I don't know. But I feel even if cinematheques are going to, cinema houses are going to go out of fashion, I don't think festivals are going to go out of fashion, because that small number of people and that core cinema lovers are going to be there in every country, every city, every place, and they are going to engage with the films in the richness that we have. But if it is going to be only OTT, no, it's just numbers. That's the corporate part of it. It's consumption. It is not enjoyment of art. It is consumption.
Question?
So this is more, thanks also for the presentation. So this is more a question, maybe generally what you think for the future. YouTube, Vimeo, like all these kind of or Twitch, all these kind of streaming services. We also have funding from Patreon or subscriptions that are more direct, and you maybe build your audience, as many like to say, parasocially, like you have an identity. And you need to always communicate with your audience. Oh, what do you want to see next? There is a constant discussion. I have personally not seen this development come into fiction and like production of maybe feature length or bigger scale kind of work. It's more commentary. It's more little clips and so on, but it seems to me at least that there are many ways of financing, so it could be like per production, per piece or per month, and sometimes it seems to be sustainable and sometimes not. But do you think this will finally somehow migrate into production like that you know well? If you understand my question, do you think it's going to develop more into this?
Is this a question for Kevin or
I think
for
for
both,
either of
for
us.
both, yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting proposition that I'm actually trying to get my head around, like this sort of microfinanced. Basically, if you had a patron system, Gitanjali, like people who would give you money on a subscription basis. So instead of Netflix, it's Gitanjali Flix, and we can give you, 10 euros or 20 euros a month, and you use that as a way of generating, or well, I don't want to use the word content, that might be insulting, but you use that money to create in a way that engages the audience that's supporting you. Is that within the realm of consideration? Or do you see that happening in India among Indian creators?
That should be the way to go, and that would be more interesting for me as an artist than OTT. And I know some animators who are doing that, and it is a lot of work. But yes, what is beautiful about that is, as he said, you get a direct, some amount of comments and direct interaction with your audience, and you're also free to create whatever you want to create as you want as an artist. That goes up upon your channel. The channel is not dictating what is good to make and what is not. So I think your creativity would be 100% intact. And over and above that, you create your audience, which is smaller, you work on the subscription, and you have an independent voice. And it's like a single person running, as you said, a Gitanjali Flix as opposed to a Netflix. It is happening in small amounts. It will probably keep happening. And the one thing is that individual needs to have a lot of capacity of making the film, selling it, keeping in touch with the conversations. So you have to have everything that OTT platform has as a single person, which I feel is then going to be smaller. And then one has to see this happening in numbers. The moment there are more people that if it grows and more people come in, you're going to lose that individual freedom. So it's again going to work at a small, at a mini level. And yet if a lot of people start doing it, it will be a force, I feel, which will need to be reckoned by the entertainment platforms, because then, again, that is competition for existing platforms.
And I think that's actually one of the things that Netflix considers part of their competition. It's not just about Apple, Amazon, it's also YouTube, Instagram. Basically, for them, it's every screen is a market. And it's basically, the marketplace is screens and sleep. And it's like, they want to build the amount of screens, and then they want to dominate those screens. So that's really, what you're describing is potential competition for them. So I think that's it. I really enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate your attention, and thank you so much, Gitanjali, for joining us. I hope that even through this virtual distance, you feel the warmth and the engagement and the genuine interest and the intelligence of this audience. So thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank you.